What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the BizDad Podcast. Today, I am stoked to have a conversation with Dan Hayden. Dan was referred over by Justin Janowski. If you want, go back and listen to that so you can see how perhaps those two are connected and the like-minded men referring each other to come have conversations with me. Dan is a former Army guy, so if I have to slow down my conversation, I will. If I have to tone it down, use smaller words, I'll be happy to do that for you, Dan. Just let me know. As a prior Air Force guy, I've got to harass you a little bit about that. But Dan, if you could, please go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us about your family and tell us about your business.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me on. I have listened to enough of your episodes to know that you did work a lot with the Army. So
I did.
Conversation, if we get to slow it down, that's cool. I appreciate that. Yeah, so about me, I'm a stay-at-home dad / leadership coach. Retired from the Army after 23 and a half years back in December of 2023. We're raising 4 kids. Our twin daughters are freshmen in high school. They were born in Bethesda, Maryland. Our next daughter is 12. She's in 7th grade, really wants to be a teenager right now. She was born in Hawaii. And then our son is 9. He's in 4th grade. He was born at West Point, New York when I was teaching there for a couple of years. Yeah, and following retirement, I think I found myself in all of the places that they tell you the lieutenant colonels should be in during their transition, right? Interviewing and doing all the networking stuff and going all the right events. Again, these are the spaces retiring lieutenant colonels ought to be in. And I was all set up. I had a great operations management gig all lined up. I was told the offer's coming next week. And 3 weeks later, I got the phone call that said, hey, we went with someone else. And that was about 10 days before my retirement date. And that was also the day before Thanksgiving of 2023. And we can talk about this later, but I then reoriented myself and turned to the coaching profession to write the next chapter of my life. I always knew in retirement I wanted to continue to serve others in some way, shape, or form, in some capacity. And so I turned to the coaching profession, went through some coach education and training, and now I work with Christian men, and I help them show up as calm and steady leaders in their homes and in the workplace so that they can build a lasting legacy of faith and connection with their families and beyond.
Welcome to the BizDad Podcast, where we dive into the melding of fathership and entrepreneurship with your host, the original BizDad himself, Adam Labar. Adam is a Christian, a former Air Force officer, a dad to 3 amazing kids, a coach, a real estate investor, and a business owner. On this podcast, he'll explore the unique journeys of amazing dads who are striving for greatness in both business and family. So whether you're a dad who is an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply a man striving to be a better dad, get ready as the BizDad brings you conversations to inspire, challenge, and equip you to be a better dad and entrepreneur. And now, here's Adam.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's a weird situation to be in when you're retired. My wife just retired as a lieutenant colonel, and her official retirement is, as this recording, she'll be retired, but or when this comes out. But it's one of those, like, you don't know what the other side of this world has for you. You feel like, I wish I could remember the character's name, the old guy from Shawshank Redemption that goes out and he's like, everything moves so fast out here. Like, He's so institutionalized, not like you don't know what the world is actually like on the other side of a uniform, because all you've known your entire adult life is putting on a uniform every day. And, you know, like, what does that bring me? Where does that lead me? What does that leave me with on the other side? So it's a very uncomfortable feeling. And I've separated twice, once as an enlisted guy and then once as an officer. So it's like both times, like, I didn't know what the heck to do with myself. And you would think I learned from the first one. You didn't. Like, I mean, I did a little bit because I started doing some business stuff as an officer, but it was like, what a different world. But so I want to, before we go diving down that road, because there's like 4 questions I have there, I want to rewind a little bit. You're married now. You've been married for 16 years. You've got 4 awesome kiddos. Finally had the son there at the end. Was that what you were shooting for? Is like, let's keep having kids till we have a boy? Or was it just, we want more kids, let's just keep going?
Yeah, I think it was the latter. I think it was, we want more kids, let's keep going.
Nice.
We have a fun family, and we were not expecting twins. In fact, I was in Afghanistan, and when luckily I was working for a 2-star general, and I had an international BlackBerry because we used those at the time. And I got a text message from my wife, and I knew she was having her first ultrasound. Said, "Hey, you need to call me immediately." And I thought, this can't be good, right? Yeah. And I showed the text to my boss, and he's like, yeah, you got to take that. Turns out we were having twins. We were not expecting it. And then we found out they were both girls. And it was funny because my wife grew up in a family of boys. I grew up in a family of boys. My lone sister grew up in a family of boys. And so we just sort of assumed we're going to have, at least one boy, right? Mm-hmm. There's going to be one in there. And, her sort of mindset was, what are we going to do? We don't know how to raise boys. And I said, or we don't know how to raise girls. I said, we don't know how to raise boys. So then we decided, hey, let's have another one. And we didn't care. We wanted it to be healthy, 10 fingers, 10 toes. Exactly. We had all the girl clothes. So then we had Hannah. And then we thought to ourselves, why are we going to, we have a fun family. Like this is a lot of fun. And why are we going to keep somebody else from having this much fun? Let's have another kid. And at the time, we didn't care. We didn't care if it was a boy or a girl. But I will tell you, my wife, and I forget why, but, and this was when we were at West Point, so I wasn't deployed or anything, went to ultrasound by herself, and, they took the photo, and they typed in, it's, and she heard 3 clicks. And they're like, hey, go home and open this with your husband. And, I opened it, tears came to my eyes, so we were pretty excited. Yeah. But yeah, it wasn't, we just, like I said, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and but here's the other thing. And I think it was Jim Gaffigan, the comedian, said, hey, you know what having a 4th kid is like? It's like, you're drowning in a pool and someone hands you a baby, right? That's what having a 4th kid is like. It multiplied the stress and anxiety, like multitudes.
Yeah, I mean, especially your twins are only 5 at that time, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You have 2 5-year-olds, a 3-year-old, and now a brand new baby, and you're like, son of a gun, what did we do?
That's right.
Yeah. God gave ours every 4 years, so it was like we wanted them much closer, but that is not how God planned it out. So we were in a blessed spot to be able to say, okay, well, now I've got an 11-year-old that helps me out immensely with my 2.5-year-old.
Yeah.
It just like what a difference it would be. Like we talk about how we wish they were all smashed together, and then we look at it and go, yeah, well, we've got so much help. Like, my 11-year-old is a massive help. He's able to help out a ton. So it's great. So you mentioned being you had one sister. Tell me a little bit more about your upbringing. Tell me about your parents. Tell me about what, where you grew up, what your lifestyle was like, especially your dad, if you can hit in on the type of dad you had.
Yeah. So I was the 4th I still am the 4th of 5 kids. All born right there in the 70s. My oldest brother was born in 1970, and my younger brother was born in 79. I was born in 78. There was my 2 older brothers were separated by a year. My sister, I think 2 or 3 years. She's going to kill me if she listens. And then there's a 5-year gap between my sister and I, and a 13-month gap between my next brother. So really, it was my younger brother and I. But we were heavily influenced by our older brothers and sister. We grew up in a very middle-class family in southeastern Massachusetts, very Irish Catholic middle-class family. My dad was a mailman. My mom was a pediatric nurse. And, it was one of those things where, my mom worked 2 jobs. My dad worked, 50 to 60 hours a week. Now, as a mailman, overtime is pretty highly sought after. But they use that mostly to pay for our education. We were not necessarily a family of great means. And I think it's easy for us now in the position that my kids are in to be like, well, they have everything they need, but not everything they want. Mm-hmm. They still have most of what they want. That was not our family. We had everything we needed. And that was about it. And we knew it, and we were cognizant of that. And we were at times, I don't want to say jealous, but we did look at other families like, oh, why can't we have that? But we are also very, very appreciative of everything we did. I think even early on, we recognized how hard my parents worked for us, and in order to sort of provide us the things that they were able to provide us.
So you mentioned your dad working for the post office, being a mailman. Would be an interesting job, because especially back in those days, it was the neither rain nor sleet. And now I see my post person, they don't even wear a uniform. Like sometimes it's getting delivered by a Chevy S10, and I'm like, what is going on? It's such a different world now. But you also mentioned being Irish Catholic. So thankfully, did you guys like active in the Catholic Church type of Irish Catholic, or was it just like, hey, we're Irish, we're Catholic, that's what we do?
Yeah, let me go back to the mailman thing, because you're right. He worked very long hours. He was heavily involved in his union. That was part of his identity. But also, he passed that on to my younger brother and I, because when we were in college, he got us jobs as, at the time they were called casual carriers, right? Basically a summer gig. And you signed up to do this. It was very, very good pay, but you had to work 6 hours a week, as many hours as they told you to work. You could not take a day off, no matter what, as a casual guy, right? As a summer hire. And that did a couple of things. Those summers, I mean, you want to talk about, now there's no sleet, no snow, but there was still plenty of rain, and it was all walking routes. I think my brother and I even walked some of the driving routes, which I think might have been not in accordance with some policies and regulations. That's okay. But that taught us a lot. And boy, I don't think we ever came to appreciate what our dad did for us quite as much as we did in those humid summers of slinging mail and walking 10 hours a day. It also helped me with my ruck march times, so that was pretty helpful.
I would imagine. Yeah.
I still point back to those days and think, I can crush it right now. But as far as the Irish Catholic is concerned, yeah, we were very heavily, I wouldn't say involved in our church, but we went to mass every single Sunday. We all knew there was a standing rule. If anyone a friend sleep over on Saturday night, they're going to church. And that was especially enforced specifically when my older brothers and sisters would have parties on Saturday nights. And, we would bring all of their high school friends to church with us. But yeah, and I think at the time, and looking back anyway, it was more about the practice of a religion than actually seeking out our faith. And again, that's, no slight on my parents and how they raised us. But, as the years went on, I was very heavily involved in youth ministry in my high school. And then anyway, we can talk about it later if the conversation goes that way of my faith walk. But yeah, we went every Sunday. Everybody knew it was not negotiable. And we weren't skipping.
Nice. Yeah. It's there is a difference between, you mentioned it, right? Like practicing religion and then seeking out an actual relationship, and it makes a difference. And at some point, regardless, when you're an adult, you have to decide what you're going to do anyways. Some people just continue to practice religion. Some people just kind of step away, and some people realize, but I think there's something deeper here that I need to chase down. So, but I do think we'll get into that at some point later. But let's kind of fast forward on how you decided to, you've got a pediatric nurse mom, you've got a postman dad, and then you went in the Army. Like, how did that kind of transition? How did that track become part of your?
Yeah, so I told you we were pretty middle class, and I early on my sophomore year of high school, we went to a cousin's wedding. Who again, it was up at West Point. We grew up in Massachusetts. It wasn't too far of a drive. So they were getting married, and I remember it was probably January, February. It was a winter, and the snow was coming down, and I can picture in my head where we were on post now that I've lived there and worked there. And I saw somebody in PTs, again, now I know the uniform they were wearing. But I saw somebody in PTs at like 10:30 at night in the cold snow running. And I thought to myself, that's the kind of discipline I want to have, when I grow up, right? That sort of thing. Okay, fine. So I started looking heavy at West Point. Spring break that year, I visited my brother for a week up at UMass, and nothing untoward happened. To be honest with you, it was all pretty innocent considering the place I was in. Back then it was very, very much a big party school. They've tightened it down a little bit since then. And I came back, and I think it was the independence, the freedom that I saw my brother and his friends had. And I told my dad, hey, I don't think I want to go to West Point. I think I want to go to, at the time I said, a real college, right? I said, I want to go to a real school. And, he thought, hey, I got college paid for this kid, and now we got to figure something out. So fast forward a couple of years later, and my dad said, hey, are you still interested in the Army? And I was like, yeah, I do. And so he threw an ROTC scholarship application down, and he's like, cool, fill that out, because I'm not sure how we're going to afford school for you. And I filled it out. I got a 3-year scholarship. But it's funny because my older brother did ROTC at Notre Dame, and that did not work out well for him, either academically or sort of ROTC militarily. It just wasn't his thing. And my dad said, hey, look at ROTC. talk to your cousin. My cousin at the time was a captain in the Army. He had done ROTC at Providence College. He said, talk to your cousin Pat. Pat did ROTC at Villanova. He's like, don't talk to your brother, right? So of course, the first phone call I made was to my brother.
To your brother, of course.
He basically said, hey, look, it's not for everybody. It wasn't for me, but it could be for you. And it would be a great path forward. And so I started looking more and more into that. And at the same time, within my Catholic diocese, I was going to retreats and I was going to sort of leadership development stuff. And I knew I wanted to, now at the time, I think I was more wanting to be in charge than leading.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew, hey, I want to be a leader. I want to be the person that people come to solve their problems. And I want to be the one sort of directing traffic, that sort of thing. And so that was my path to the Army. That's why. So it was my dad saying, fill out the scholarship application. Don't talk to your brother. But also this sort of desire in me to want to lead and build and grow my leadership, competencies and attributes.
So
my parents will tell you, dating all the way back to sort of farm league, minor league, baseball, right? They're like, you wanted to be a catcher because you wanted to be the sort of field general. You wanted to be the one always, you always wanted to be in the mix, they could see it. They saw it in me from an early age, but, of course I didn't. I just, I wanted to get dirty as a catcher. So.
Yeah. I wanted to be a catcher until I caught a missed pitch off the bottom of my glove and took me down for a little while on a day I did not wear my cup. And I was like, I don't want to be a catcher anymore. But no, I loved the line that you just said, I wanted to be in charge more than I wanted to be a leader.
Yeah.
And that's something I think that entices a lot of people. They just want to be in charge. That doesn't mean they're capable of actually leading. And you and I, both being prior military folks, have seen plenty of people that really wanted to be in charge but didn't know how to lead and didn't want to lead. So it's an interesting place to find yourself. So you go to ROTC at UMass. You join the Army. What did you do in the Army?
I was an engineer officer. And again, unlike the Air Force, unlike the Navy, in order to be in the engineer branch, we call them branches, the career fields. In order to be in the engineer career field, you do not need an engineer degree.
Mm-hmm.
I was a political science major. I went into college thinking I wanted to be a chemistry major. Well, after the very unimpressive GPA I brought home my first year, my dad had a pretty straight talk with me, and it went something like this. You got 4 years, figure it out. Okay. So I moved from a hard science to an easy science, and I moved over to political science. But the Army made me an engineer, right? Because only the Army can take a poli-sci kid and say, you're an engineer, good luck.
Mm-hmm.
So probably the first 5 or 6 years of my career were all combat engineering stuff, sapper stuff, right? Building stuff, blowing stuff up. And having a lot of fun doing that kind of stuff. And then, once I got into my senior captain, junior major / field grade years, I spent some time at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers headquarters in Washington, D.C. That's when our twins were born. And the Corps of Engineers is, it's a federal agency run by the military. And a lot of people don't understand that dynamic and the sort of civil military relation aspect to all of that, which is fascinating to me anyway. And then, sort of bounce between Corps of Engineers and other stuff like West Point, and still back, with combat engineering. I deployed to Afghanistan with a combat engineer battalion, and I was the battalion operations officer, the S3 we call it, right? Just managing all of the route clearance assets that we had in that part of the country. And then later deployed to Afghanistan with the Corps of Engineers. So managing the systems and people and processes for base camp construction for the Afghan National Forces, stuff like that. So the breadth and depth of my career as an engineer officer is very wide and shallow, right? But yeah, I've done a lot of cool stuff, met a lot of cool people, been to a lot of cool places.
Yeah, so it sounds like that first deployment to Afghanistan 2011. Is that right?
Yeah, let's back up.
Yeah.
Young lieutenants, and we were a bunch of lieutenants were sitting in a coffee shop, and our battalion executive officer, the second guy in charge of our battalion, walks into the coffee shop and just sort of throws an offhand comment down on the table. It's like, hey, we're looking for a lieutenant to go to Afghanistan for 6 months. And, we all sort of laughed. And then within 20 minutes, I was in his office going, hey, sir, I think I'd like to hear more about that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 2002 because we were in Afghanistan and I just wanted to get in the fight.
Yeah.
Right. And so off I went. I was in Afghanistan from, I can still remember, October of 2002. until May of 2003. While I was there, this was funny, right? This goes back to the poli-sci engineer thing. I was actually now a facilities engineer for a civil affairs task force in downtown Kabul. And we had a compound in downtown Kabul that was all a bunch of residential houses sort of wired together for electricity. And so it was my job to make sure everybody had electricity and running water. And I remember my boss just looked at me and he said, "Hey, engineer, what's your discipline?" And I was like, I don't know, sir. I think I have some. And he's like, no, what'd you study? And I said, political science. And, you could just see like the face palm. They sent me a poli-sci major for my engineer. And I was like, yes, sir. So that was an interesting 6.5
welcome
months. So,
yes.
Yeah. And then while I was there, my unit from Fort Lewis, from Washington, deployed to Iraq. And so I redeployed May or June. Anyway, I redeployed and I was asked, "Hey, do you want to stay on rear detachment or do you want to head forward to Iraq? It's going to be a 6-month deployment." And they were about a month and a half into it. And I said, "I can do another 4+ months. Let's go hang out with the boys." And, as you may be aware, that 6-month deployment turned into 1 year. For me, it was 10 months. So, I was gone for like 17 months straight between Afghanistan and Iraq, and then moved to Fort Leonard Wood for some professional military education. We call it the Captain's Career Course, right? 12, 13 months there, got a master's degree, and then volunteered to go back to Iraq to serve on a military training team to fight and train the Iraqi army. And I've never been more irresponsible with my own life than I was during that deployment. Boy, that was fun. But again, I'm single, so I can do this sort of thing. When we were in the green room, so to speak, you were talking about, watching the Patriots lose to the Giants, in Baghdad. I can't tell you how many championships I've seen our Boston teams win, either in Iraq or Afghanistan. So, but I did 13 months there, came home, and now we are in 2006. And luckily, I found myself, from a mental and emotional standpoint, and physical, to be honest with you too, I found myself lucky enough to be in a unit that was very early in its generation. So there was no chance of me being able to deploy. And I purposefully sought out that unit because I knew if I needed to put myself in a position where I couldn't accept another deployment, both emotionally and mentally. Because I was always, I didn't know 3 out of 4 years I'm deployed doing all kinds of awesome stuff, but it's the only thing I knew. So anyway, that's when I met my wife. And then we moved, or I moved. We were geographically separated for the first 18 months of our marriage because she was on active duty as well. Moved out to DC, worked at the Corps of Engineers. While I was there, I took on another 4-month deployment to Afghanistan. I was working for a 2-star general. And so those were the first 4 deployments, volunteered for all of them. It was the 5th and the 6th one that we were not too keen on because by that time we had kids.
Yeah.
And we were happily married and we had kids. So those were tough.
Yeah, I like how you added in there happily married, because there are plenty of the marriages we see in the military, people are deploying just to get away from them, and it's like that sounds miserable. So thankfully for me, from my perspective, the same thing that you just said is all of my combat deployments were all before I got married, and what a different world, And I was looking at changing jobs, and I was talking to a buddy of mine. I was a canine handler at the time, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm looking at a different job." I said, "Yeah," and it seems like they die less often in that job than our job. As a bomb dog handler, you're out and about doing a bunch of stupid things, and I mean, it's not actually stupid, but you're literally going to find bombs that are trying to blow you up, and you're getting in ticks, and you're doing all sorts of nonsense. Right. You're like, all right, this is a different world, especially for an Air Force guy. But and I was like, well, what a comparison to look back and go, well, I'm thinking about transitioning jobs because they die less often, And it's like I couldn't imagine having that conversation, being married and having kids, right?
Yeah,
and I'm very, very thankful that I got all of that out of me beforehand. I guess when I went to Africa, it was technically a combat zone, but it wasn't, where I was. I mean, I was in and out of the embassy a lot in Niamey. I wasn't, out on the border of Nigeria dealing with, some of the stuff the SF guys are.
Yeah.
But man, oh man, what a new world I'm in now, right? And now you're sitting here in a new world. You got 4 kids. You've got a business that you're running. You're like, man, this is nowhere near where I was looking at going. How did you decide after doing all of that stuff? You've done all of these leadership courses. You've done all these things. You've got a plan on the way out that you already talked about. They're like, hey, here we go. And then 10 days before that, you find out, well, there goes that plan. That's not happening. I'm going to go help people lead. Like I talk to people about this often because you look at somebody like Jocko Willink, who does this inside of large companies and helps coach and guide. And it's like, if we can help our military members realize the knowledge, skills, and abilities they have that apply into the quote unquote real world, they would be a massive help. So how did you kind of come to that conclusion and say, okay, this is the direction I want to go. This is how I want to start serving after I retire?
Yeah, it has to do with what I'm doing now. It has to do with coaching. Back in, trying to get my years right, 2019, 2020, I took part in the Army's, I believe it's now, I believe they don't do it anymore, but it was the Battalion Commander Assessment Program. They bring you to Fort Knox. They do a whole bunch of cognitive, non-cognitive assessments, and you know, they meet you. You meet with the psychs, and they get in your head and scramble some eggs. But it's to make sure that you're the right person that they want to lead and command battalions, right? And so, but as a byproduct, as a follow-on offer from that program, you know, the Army sent out to, you know, a couple of hundred of us saying, hey, we want to offer you some coaching. And I didn't know what that meant, but it was, you know, it was further development. I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do this. Let's try to get better. Because in the Army, we've got it's one word, and it's you know, coach, teach, mentor, and that's it, right? But when you break those words out, a coach is different than a teacher, is different than a mentor. And I learned that later on. But that started my coaching journey, and I didn't even know it. I remember getting off my first coaching call and super excited, went in, you know, and I said to Holly, I think I could do this when I retire. This is super cool. And so that was my first exposure to it. And then during my transition, I signed on with a nonprofit organization that also provides transition coaches. And so I had like 6 months, you know, paid for through this nonprofit, you know, a transition coach. And then there was another nonprofit that I was working with a coach through. And so I was getting all of this good stuff, and I was thinking, you know, I could really do this. But again, we were looking at our finances, and I didn't think I would have that flexibility, both in time to get certified and all this other stuff, as well as financial flexibility, because we decided to retire here in Southern California, which, look, it's 75 degrees. I'm looking at, you know, the San Gabriel Mountains outside my back window right now. There's plenty to not like about Southern Cal, and it will live up to every stereotype and expectation you have, whether they're good or bad. But I'll tell you, and that includes expenses, but my life is pretty good. But we were worried about that financial piece. And so that's when I said, okay, look, I'll just, you know, nose to the grindstone. I'll start this networking and interview and all this other stuff, right? Well, like I said, that call came, and it wasn't the call I wanted, it wasn't the call I expected. And it was a bit of, now, because the call didn't come the next week like they said it would, I was already mentally preparing myself. Hey, something's going on, right? Just be patient. It's probably not going to be what you want. Well, on December 1st, and again, it's nothing to sneeze at, but my active duty pay turns into a pension. And so from December 1st, my paycheck gets cut in half. Luckily, we had planned our family transition on my wife's side as well. She was in a good, still is, still in a good job, because we had started planning that a couple of years prior. She's a high school history teacher. And again, one of the benefits of living in Southern California is they pay their teachers really well. So we were going to be okay. Fast forward a couple of months later, so February of 24, I'm on a coaching call with my transition coach. And he, you know, sort of, in coaching, you don't necessarily want to look back a whole lot, right? It's sort of what therapy is for in that regard. But he said, hey, look, in retrospect, if you could rewind a year and all of these numbers, all these assumptions that you had surrounding your family and personal finances, we've sort of proven that those were inaccurate. That assumption is incorrect. So knowing that you have the financial flexibility and you have the flexibility of time, is there something that you would rather pursue or something you would have pursued? And I said, yeah, coaching. And so that's how I got into coaching, because I had the financial flexibility. Now, don't get me wrong. Like my family, you know, we are very financially stable, but we are no longer flexible. I'll take, right? Mm-hmm. But all of that aside, that's how I got into it, through the benefit of coaching, receiving coaching, and also having the time and space in order to sort of build this thing up.
The second that somebody receives coaching and goes through it, if they found it effective, they go, wow, I would love to be able to do this for other folks. Which it sounds like you got that in like 2019, 2020 in that coaching course through the Army. So now that you're doing it and you analyzed in early 2024 and you said, hey, this is what I want to do. How did you decide who to target, who you were going to build, like how you wanted to grow this into an actual business? Because it's one thing to say, I want to do this. It's another thing to say, this is who I want to do it for. And this is how I want to attack it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because you saw me smile there when you asked it. Couple of aspects to it. I have prior to this, embarking on this coaching journey, zero entrepreneurial spirit, no experience whatsoever entrepreneurial. It wasn't modeled for me growing up. Like I said, my dad was a mailman. My mom was a nurse, but service was, and my wife's parents were both teachers. Service was in our DNA. So we always knew we were going to continue to serve in some way, shape, or form. But the entrepreneurial stuff absolutely scared the death out of me. That's why during my transition, I never went to any of the entrepreneurial seminars or sort of courses or anything like that. So that was scary. The coaching is easy. And this is what I learned, right? Coaching is easy. It's all of the other stuff. It's running the business. It's being the manager and the technician and the marketer and that sort of thing. But how did I choose? It was pretty easy because in that conversation, and he's like, oh, have you thought about who you want to work with? I said, yeah, I want to work with young adults. And he's like, okay, so why is that? And I taught at West Point for 3 years. I ran the largest Army ROTC program on the West Coast for 3 years. I had a heart for, 20 somethings, for young adults, because I remember those years of my life were incredibly tumultuous. And though, despite the structure that the Army, provided for me, like I said, I volunteered for 3 deployments in 4 years, right? And look, I don't regret any of that because that was a lot of fun. So, okay, good. Young adults. And then 15 months later of banging my head against the wall, I've got one paying client who's paying me pennies on the dollar. And we're made great progress. Like, don't get me wrong. And, I just got an email from over Thanksgiving. I haven't talked to him in 3 months. And, hey, thanks for everything you did for me. Everything we ever talked about. It's just made a huge difference in my life. However, look, I mean, we live in Southern California. Okay. And no one's going to shoot you straight quite like an 8th grade daughter, because they're freshmen now, but when I would pick them up at school, last year, I mean, hey, Dad, so you making any money yet?
Lovely.
What? I'm sorry. I've got a pension, Dad. I've got my VA benefits, and like, yeah, don't worry about. She's like, yeah, but do you have any clients? I mean, seriously, how's this business thing? I'm like, oh my goodness, right? And this was probably a weekly, monthly occurrence. So anyway, and it was through our mutual connection, Justin Janowski. Somebody turned me on to his organization, Faith to Influence, and so it was one of those. I gave him my email address and I'm reading the emails. Okay, now I'm subscribing to his podcast, and okay, now he's doing a live conference. And it was a real leap of faith going to this conference because I have no marketing experience, up until that point, no sales experience. And it wasn't something I was afraid of. It wasn't anything that made me nervous. It was just one of those, I don't know how to do this thing. So I went to his conference, and signed on to one of his sales programs, and also had a coaching call with him as a follow-on. And my coaching framework is through a mental fitness framework, mental fitness defined as our ability to manage our day-to-day stressors and anxieties with a positive mindset rather than a negative mindset, right? It's identifying those negative thought habits and thought patterns and identifying them in the moment and shifting to a more positive mindset. And so I coach men now on how to do that anyway. And I was talking to Justin about this. I was talking all about my mission statement and my signature offer. And he started sort of probing, hey, why young adults? And, I've got a heart for young adults, and I think it could really benefit from that, really help them, that sort of thing. And he said, okay, tell me about this mental fitness framework. It's called the PQ program, is through Positive Intelligence is the name of the book. And they have a 6-week mental fitness program. Anyway, and so I was talking to him about, okay, this is why I offer PQ as part of my coaching. And it's because of the undeniable growth and development that I saw in myself when I went through PQ. It was that my wife saw in me, that my kids saw in me. They just saw me show up better. Right. I mean, there was look, I no longer yell at my kid. I don't scream at them. I yell only to be heard. And now they know the difference. I have a daughter who had some issues with sort of self-differentiation emotionally, right? Where she would identify with my anger and that would anger her, right? Sweetheart, my anger is not your anger. My frustration is not your frustration. And that can go a long way. Anyway, I was telling Justin all about this mental fitness program, this PQ, and the impact it's had on my life and the impact it's had on my relationship with my daughters and how and my son, and how I've been able to use those mental fitness habits and this program to help one of my daughters. And she's a softball pitcher. I have 3 daughters. 2 of them play softball. Both of them pitch. No more mentally and emotionally taxing position on the softball field than pitcher, right? Because it's every pitch. It's on you, right? If you strike out and you're a left fielder, cool. You've got a whole nother round of the round of the lineup to mentally get straight. Well, if you're a pitcher, you've got 20 seconds to get that ball back and get straight mentally. So anyway, my daughter struggled emotionally and mentally with the aspects of pitching, and she would just break down. The scouting report was out on her. Get under her skin, she'll break down. Umpire squeezes her, she'll get frustrated, she'll start to cry. And so I worked with her one off season through these things and allowing her to, again, we're not stuffing down our negative emotion. We're not stuffing it down. We're not ignoring our emotions. They're there, right? But how do we recover? How do we respond? So I would always tell her, hey, look, mistakes are going to happen. And I told my other daughter this the other day before she was getting ready for a test. Look, you're going to make mistakes. That's okay. How are you going to respond? And so she came back the next season. I mean, she gave up a home run on the second pitch of the game and got the ball back, struck the next 3 girls out on 10 pitches. And she came back to the dugout like beaming. Dad, it's working. And I was like, fired up, right?
Awesome.
That's what you want to help your kids with. So I'm getting to the point, I promise. I was telling Justin all this stuff, and Justin says, Dan, I'm sorry. I just want to put this on your heart. I think you should be working with Christian men. I think you should be working with Christian fathers. And so that started my journey. I made a pretty violent and sudden pivot. After a week or so, met with a couple of pastors, met with a couple of dads, and they're like, yep, go for it. And one guy even told me, what took you so long? So that's what I do now.
Okay. I love how the desire though was going to be for the younger folks, right?
Yeah.
Are you finding that the Christian men that you're impacting is also impacting those younger folks you wanted to impact anyways, right? Because if there's a new leader in that house and a new leader in that family, like a refreshed leader, I should say, a newfound leader in themselves, like what a difference that makes in that home.
Yeah, none of my clients have young adults. I've got plenty of sort of warm leads, if you will. And we're talking about the impact it can have. The ages of my clients' kids range in like 4 to 18. But yeah, that's a great point. And that was one of the points Justin made was, hey, look, you can still have a heart for young adults. Because there were points in time during that journey where parents would come to me and they're like, hey, I really want you to work with my daughter. I really want you to work with my son. And I'll pay for it, which is great. But then you talk to the kid and, they're not going to listen to mom and dad, right? Right, wrong, or indifferent. The part of our brain that makes decisions, isn't fully formed until our mid-20s. And frankly, that would explain a lot of the decisions we made in our early.
Probably spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely explains a lot of the decisions and why we choose a lot of 18 to 25-year-old men to go fight our wars, because we don't really think well about those types of things, right? But as you are now kind of building this out and you're looking at it and you're like, man, Christian men is kind of a good direction to take this. What sort of conversations are you having with your wife on all of this? You mentioned your daughter kind of saying some stuff. What about your wife? How are you guys kind of working through this transition? How are you guys understanding together as a team to move forward on the direction that you're trying to go?
Yeah, it comes down to one word. She knows that I really felt pulled to this. And I've and it's not just mental fitness, because I've found that intersection of faith and mental fitness, right? Because the mental fitness program is largely based in, neuroscience and cognitive behavioral therapy and sports psychology, right? But what does Scripture say about that? And because when you figure that out, you realize all of the science is just now finally catching up to the Scripture when it comes to this stuff. But so we had a shared faith that this is where God wants me to go. And she has just trusted me implicitly, with the decisions I made, whether it be financial or what have you. But that's really, she's obviously my biggest supporter. I talk all the time. I don't talk about the conversations I have with my clients, right? Because there's a confidentiality piece to it. But yeah, we will have open conversations about, hey, you're just a different person. I've heard those words come from her, conversations with my kids. Like I said, I helped my daughter with softball. Again, I don't know too many, she was 13 at the time. I don't know too many 13-year-old girls that are going to allow their dads to help them with the mental and emotional well-being in any aspect of life. I get it. It's just softball, but it was a big deal to her. I'm now working on her with academics, right? Like, hey, look, before you go into the classroom, just close your eyes, take a deep breath and do some mental fitness reps, get yourself in the right mind space. Cause I don't know. They're 15 now. They turned 15 yesterday. I don't know what it's like to be a 15-year-old girl in the year 2025, so what can I do to equip them for that? And it's even cooler, Adam, because last summer they're at church camp and one of her best friends was having just a panic attack, and she doesn't know why. You don't know why your brain senses a threat and the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, whether that threat is real or not, right? But what can you do to identify that's going on and then shift over to the positive? So my daughter takes her friend aside and said, hey, do you trust me? And she's like, yeah, of course I trust you, and she's still like on high alert, right? My daughter led her these same mental fitness exercises that I had taught her for softball, led this girl through them. And the girl, and they closed out in a quick prayer, which is very important. Like the girl just like, wow, how did you do that? Like you were brilliant. How did you know to do that? And she goes, my dad taught me that. And then she gets home from camp. Nice. She's like, Dad, I had this cool thing happen. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's working. But these are conversations that are currently ongoing. To answer your question, it's trust. My wife and I just trust each other implicitly.
So you guys have been married for 16 years, and obviously faith is important to you. Were you guys both, I think before we started recording, you had mentioned that your wife kind of helped you get back on your faith journey. So can we go back to how that worked? Sure. You guys got married, what that looked like, and then how you ended up becoming a stronger Christian through that process.
Yeah. So my wife and I, we met in the Army. She's 5 years younger than I am. And so, again, I was a captain at the time. I was in a company command, and she was a first lieutenant about to turn captain. Anyway, there was some dynamics, and we were in a brigade combat team, and she was in a cavalry squadron, in which she was the only female of any type, officer or enlisted, in that entire squadron. So so there were some dynamics that play for her, right? Because, our sort of courtship, if you would ask either of us at any point in time, are you guys in a relationship? I would have said yes, and she absolutely would have said no, right? And, after we got married, the running joke was, he just kind of wore me down. I mean, there's a lot more to that. But so we met in the Army, and it's funny because my best friend, he was deployed at the time, but his wife was working. She was also in the Army. She was working rear detachment for one of the other units. And she sent me an email, and she said, hey, we're sending a lieutenant over to be reassigned to your unit. I think you should meet her. Right. And there was very much implied, intent behind all of that. And so, that was that. And we just sort of, I want to say we dated off and on, there was but up until that point, like I said, I grew up Catholic. And when I went to Catholic schools K through, my senior year, I wore gray corduroys from the time I was like 5 until the time I was 18. And I'll never wear them again. And, and then I went to UMass, not a Catholic institution, obviously. And I wasn't like corrupted. I did all the things that, college kids do. Right. But I didn't walk away from my faith. I didn't stop believing, in the key tenets of my faith. It just wasn't a priority for me, right? And then I joined the Army, and you deploy, and you see things, and you experience things. And through those things, a person going through some of the stuff that we have, Adam, can only, come out with two different, sort of ideas. There is no God, or Oh yeah, he's here. This is proof, right? I mean, when you're sitting on when you're pulling security for the Iraqi army, and you're sitting on an IED waiting for EOD to come, right? I think we still got guys waiting. That's an inside joke. And then your Humvee pulls off the objective, and a bomb goes off where you were sitting, right? You understand? Okay, right? Something's there's a higher power here. So redeployed, met my wife. I knew I wanted to sort of rediscover, reignite. I wanted to get back into the church. I attended a local Catholic church a couple of times. Felt like home, but really wasn't feeling it. And then my wife slowly but surely sort of convinced me to go to church with her every Sunday. I was a little hesitant because it wasn't a Catholic, mass, and it wasn't sort of what I was used to. And that sort of slowly but surely brought me back to Christ, right? And our wedding, her dad was a pastor, so he co-officiated the wedding with the pastor that she grew up with. We got married here in Redlands, California. And then we knew we wanted to raise our kids in the Christian faith, and it just started to slowly build and get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, right? And it was through moments of joy, right? Watching your kids get born, and it was through moments of pain. My career, it went up and down, right? And there were some painful moments there, but and there were times where all I could do was lean on my faith and trust that this is what God had planned for me.
Yeah, to go back to the deployment thing, and I talked to a lot of people and about deployments, about their thoughts. I would say that I started off, especially after Iraq, as the kind of guy who was like, I still believe there was a God, but I was like, yeah, he doesn't really care what happens down here, though, And it was, like, I know he's there, but, the things that I saw, there's no way that he could really actually care what's happening down here. Like, and then you have to remember that we are still a group of sinful, lost people around the entire world.
That's right.
And when you amplify that with false doctrine and false theology, it makes it just that much more intense. And it took me a while to kind of catch on to that. Probably after my Afghanistan deployment, or during my Afghanistan deployment, was really more of like where I started to open my eyes to that a bit more. Because there was one time I remember, like, my mom swears she doesn't remember this, and I think I've told the story on the podcast before. But I've got my at the time fiance. I don't think we were married yet. Maybe we were married. I don't remember. But I was out of the military, and I'm driving my car, and I forgot to put gas in the car before I got on the highway. And I knew I needed gas, but we were going 1,000 miles an hour. Mentally, I'm always going 1,000 miles an hour. But I jump on the highway, and I was like, dang, nabbit, I forgot to get gas. And my mom's like, it's okay, God willing, we'll be. I said, God doesn't care about my dang gas tank. If he doesn't care about this, he doesn't care about it. And I was like, why did I just get so angry so quickly? Yeah. Like, I was livid, and I was like, man, oh man. And then I suppose if I look back on it, it was, I was struggling so much with that, like, why would God let all of these things happen?
Yeah.
Part of my brain that I was like, this is just obnoxious to me to hear that he's going to help my gas tank get gas, like, and in the grand scheme of things, if he wants to, he obviously can, but it is a difficult situation to walk away from deployed environments and realize one way or another where your brain goes. And I would say the same thing for me is my wife helped me kind of get my brain back on track and understand where I was going and why I was doing what I was doing and why faith was important. But man, it's difficult to talk to folks who haven't gone through some of those things on how that works, but yet we all struggle with our faith one way or another. So I want to bounce that over to you on the coaching side that you're doing, right? You're talking to Christian men on helping them get in the right mental space, right? So what sort of Bible verses are you using? What sort of things are you looking at? What sort of situations from the Bible are you using to apply to these men to help them understand where they're going? Maybe they don't have a combat experience. Maybe they're just, quote unquote, just running business or just a W-2 or just doing whatever, but yet, we have previous experience that can really help, and we have a Bible that is a living, breathing word that can help these folks. So what sort of things are you pulling to help these guys get through some of the situations they're in?
Yeah, so you've got, and again, it's we call them the saboteurs. Those are your 10 negative mental thought patterns, right? That will sabotage. They judge you, they judge your relationships, they judge others. And then, the accomplice saboteurs, right? They're called the stickler, the pleaser, the hyperachiever, the avoider, the controller, right? These are all things. And they had underlying strengths at some point in time, but because of the neural pathways that our brains have built, those are the neural pathways our brains tend to travel down because our brains are lazy, right? It takes up 2% of our body, uses 20% of its energy. So it's a good tip for you parents out there. Tell your kids to eat before a test. But on the other side, we have what in the PQ framework we call the SAGE powers, right? Empathize, navigate, innovate, activate. And these are the positive thought patterns. Okay. The reason I'm sharing all of this is because one of the verses I lean on a lot is Galatians 5:22, the fruit of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Where do you want to live? Do you want to live in the saboteur sort of pathway, right? Of fear and anger and judgment, or do you want to live through the fruit of the Spirit? Okay, so that's one of them. And there's always, and again, I can't off the top of my head, but take captive your thoughts, right? I think it's also Philippians 4:8, the things that are good, the things that are right, that sort of thing. Always think of these things. Stories about, folks who have lived through, who have experienced life in the Bible through a saboteur mindset, vice, a sage mindset, right? And obviously the greatest sage mindset in the Bible is Christ. When he's praying in the garden, he knows what's going to happen. He's still living in the sage, and he's still accepting his circumstances and finding the gifts and the opportunities. That's the sage perspective, right? It's not rejecting, it's not being resigned to your circumstances, it's accepting them and finding the gift and the opportunities. And Christ did that a lot. You juxtapose Jonah, in the storm, and you juxtapose Christ in the storm, right? And one is through a saboteur mindset, the other through a sage. My pastor said something very poignant. My pastor rarely goes through, a book of the Bible as a sermon series. He hasn't done it since we've been going to this church for 4+ years. But we're going through the Gospel of Mark, and this was the story. They get in the boat, and the storms come, and they're heading to the other shore of the Sea of Galilee. And they're going to go, into sort of Gentile territory, if you will, right? And the apostles are freaking out because the storm's going crazy. And what is Christ doing? He's taking a nap, right? He's exhausted a day after, preaching, etc. And they're like, teacher, aren't you worried we're going to drown? And he just sort of wakes up and he calms the storm. And my pastor said, hey, look, the same Christ that can calm the storm is the same Christ that can, on occasion, also take you into the storm. Right. And that's sort of another sort of perspective that, we could have had when we were deployed too. Right. So when you're facing a test, it's not that God's not there. It's, he's all a part of this. Right. Because the same God that can calm the storm is the same calm that will on occasion bring you into the storm as well. So I don't know if that answers your question entirely, Adam, but
no, it absolutely does. And I love that last bit too, to think about it. Like Jesus led them into that storm and remain calm, knowing that, hey, we're in control here. It's no big deal. We're going through the storm. Nobody else knows that. They're all freaking out. And he's like, all right, fine. There you go. Settle down. Here we are. I'm going to go back to my nap. Thanks a bunch. Appreciate it. Let's get rolling. If I remember correctly, there were people talking about wanting to jump out of the boat and all this stuff. And it's like, what is happening right now? Because we do that in everyday life. And every storm that we walk through, we're like, oh yeah, I've got to remember to go back to, and I love the juxtaposition of Jesus and Jonah, which I don't think I've ever juxtaposed those two next to each other. I've talked about Jonah a lot, and the fact of regardless, eventually God's going to put you where he needs you, even if you're refusing to do it. If it takes a daggum whale to get you there, he's going to do it, right? But no matter how much you fight, he's going to spit you back out where you need to be. But I've never juxtaposed thinking about, Jonah's literally jumps out no, I'm not going there, and then goes through all of that. So what is your goal now? As you're growing this business, you're building this, you're reaching out. Obviously, I'd love for anybody who's hearing this that would like to reach out to Dan to do that. What is your goal to continue to grow this and the impact you're wanting to have, if for nothing else, to be able to tell your daughter, yes, look at what we're doing. I've got multiple clients now, you little jerk face. But I'm not saying to call your kids jerk faces, but my kids have been called that once or twice. But what is your goal now as you're growing this, and as you're setting an example for your kids, and you're showing all of this, and your kids are growing? Obviously, you're going to want to keep building this. So where are we going with the coaching?
Yeah, I think it's pretty standard, but it's also very heartfelt to say that I want to make the greatest impact I can on as many men and their families as I can. Because I told you the story about her going to summer camp, right? And that's the legacy piece to it. I'm equipping them even at this age. And I've got stories about my 9-year-old and my 12-year-old, right? I'm equipping them at this age to live life with more of a positive mindset. Now, it's different how you do it depending on how old, right? It in the brain science says, like, my 9-year-old, I can't teach him mental fitness, but I can show him mental fitness, right? And I can show him what it's like to not get, frustrated at the drop of a hat. And that's how I'm working with him. Same thing with my 12-year-old, as she's quickly becoming a teenager, and her brain and her body's changing, right? But with my 15-year-olds, as teenagers, they're starting to be, they are at the point where, hey, look, I can't command and control them so much anymore. I have to shift more into a coaching and walk alongside them, right? Still set boundaries. That's not changing. One of them brought home a pretty poor test score, so we set some boundaries pretty quick on TV and phone and stuff like that. And it's worked, quite frankly, because she's been studying a lot more lately. You can still set boundaries, but how do we walk alongside them, right? How do we use a coaching mindset to walk alongside them? But that's where I want to go with this. I want to impact as many men, and I want to empower as many men as I can to show up in their families, and in their faith, because again, this is all backed by scripture. That's my goal. I mean, do I have numbers associated with it? Sure. Do I have, number of clients I'd like to have, I've got all of those figures, right? And they'll come, but I want to impact. I don't know. I'm telling Adam, I would show up from work, and I enjoyed what I was doing at work, but I would show up mentally and emotionally drained, physically drained from work after, whatever I was doing. And like the littlest thing would set me off, right? A fork dropping on a plate at dinner the whole world would stop and everybody would look at me to see if I'm going to just lose my mind. And sometimes I did. And, it's like an out of body experience where you're screaming at your kids and you're like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing? And you can't stop it. Right. And this is a small story, but this has really, really helped me sort of not yell when they drop a dinner fork, right? Not completely freak out when my son, who, look, he's the youngest child. He's also the only boy. So things get done for him more often than they probably should, right? And hey, Dad, can I have a cup of juice? Yeah, sure. Yeah, let me get that for you. No, Dad, I want to do it. I'm like, all right, cool, go for it. And what happens? Half a gallon of apple juice all over the world, right? And he starts freaking out. And you have to show up with a calming present. But it's okay. It's just juice. All right. But also, I'm not cleaning that up. Right.
Yeah.
But I will show him and I will teach him how to properly clean half a gallon of apple juice from the floor and the counter and under the fridge and everywhere else. But it would have been so easy 2 years ago, before I started this sort of coaching and mental fitness journey, to just completely, A, do it for him, or B, could just lose my mind, right? I want to empower other dads to be able to show up and react with a more positive mindset to the little things and to the big things every single day. It all applies to the home. It applies to work and I've got a client who uses all of my coaching at work so that he can show up for his kids at home, because he's got 4 young kids and a set of twins. So yeah,
you understand that journey.
Yeah.
You mentioned something there that I want to foot stomp on. Is you said before you would have with the apple juice scenario would have either got really angry, screamed and yelled, or cleaned up yourself. And either one of those are bad for your kids, right? Choosing either direction is bad, right? They need to understand what it means to clean up for themselves. They made a mess. They chose to do something, that they made a mistake. It happens. We're all going to do it. But you still have to, now you're responsible for taking care of the issue. And the other side, the opposite side of that, screaming and yelling, is going to be detrimental, because the next time they even touch an apple juice, they're going to be like, all right, well, who's behind me? What's going on? I'm going to be really careful. Now they're going to be shaking and spilling it because they're shaking, because they're afraid they're going to get screamed at again for whatever. Where do you find the balance? How do you coach people into mentally getting themselves in that right? Because I will say that there are times where I know I go off the handle a bit more than I should. And then, I'll look at another situation and feel like I'm doing a whole lot of care and love and jumping into something. And really all I'm doing is babying them and taking care of a problem that they could have easily managed themselves. So, how do you help men find that balance between, sometimes obviously it is a simple, hey, just try this thing. And sometimes it can be a lot more in depth, but how do we work through that?
Yeah, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, the saboteur path and the sage path, right? And these neural pathways that exist, right? Your saboteur pathways, those look like Main Street USA, and your sage pathways, again, the fruit of the spirit. Now, as Christians, we are probably a little better equipped, and those neural pathways are probably a little more, they're not a single track, right? They're probably an improved trail or road, because we can lean on our faith. But it has, the coaching program, the PQ framework, it has the tools and the mental fitness exercises to allow you to build up those sage neural pathways. And so when an event happens, you identify the emotion in the moment and switch over to the sage, because it's your choice. Because here's the good news: God gave us the authority to command our thoughts and emotions, right? Our thoughts and emotions are not who we are. And so it's through mental fitness and, again, tapping into and telling our brains. And it happens eventually. Those neural pathways are so well built. It happens without even us knowing it. And that's another key part of my coaching program with these men. Is we meet once a week and we talk about topics that are pertinent to us as Christians, as fathers, as men, viewed through the lens of faith and mental fitness, right? And we share wins. Hey, we share wins, we share losses, right? Because, again, bad things are still going to happen, right? Things are still going to upset you, but how are you going to respond? Look, my first reaction, I grew up driving in southeastern Massachusetts and New England, okay? They drive a little differently there. I don't know if, people know that or not. And
For sure.
It's still in my DNA. My wife is still not a fan of my driving, and she lets it know. So look, somebody cuts me off. My first reaction isn't, bless his heart, he must be. No, my first reaction is judgment, right? And in the moment, I think to myself, that's your judge. Shift it, right? Just at the very least, like I said, accept the fact this guy cut you off, and then think about all the different reasons why that guy might have cut you off. It could be he's a worse driver than I am, or it could be, hey, he's in a hurry, whatever. Again, bad things are still going to happen, but how are we going to respond? So it's through the mental fitness program that I coach you through. It's a 6-week program. That really builds the foundation. That installs a new operating system and rewires your brain. And it's through that. And then the practical application of all of that. And it's through our weekly calls and also one-on-one coaching, through that PQ framework. And again, I share with them my own stuff, just as much as they share with me, through the week. I'm like, man, I can't wait to talk to the guys about this, Hey man, how was the week? And they're just like, ooh, let me tell you about what so-and-so did. Anyway, so that's how it happens.
So how have the conversations shifted now with your kids personally? Like, hey, I'm coaching these men. This is what I'm doing. This is where our life is going. You mentioned that they've all noticed it and that your wife has noticed a change in you since you started doing that yourself. Have they discussed with you about how they're, how they feel about things? What sort of conversations do you have around your personal change? You said they've mentioned it, but I'd love to hear actual story, like what they're saying at the dinner table, what they're saying at, obviously we heard about softball, but how are they continuing down this path with the changes in Dad?
Yeah. So I'll go back to the softball thing, right? How my daughter sort of allowed me to do this, right? And it started with a conversation. Because look, I mean, she knows at the time she would break that. She knew she had mental and emotional sort of strain when it came to pitching. And in fact, I mean, we noticed that in seasons prior with hitting and with fielding, right? And I would always be in the dugout just like, hey, suck it up, hey, look, you're not the only kid on this team. You're not the only one responsible for getting on base, right? You're not the only one who strikes out, that sort of thing. And then, it all shifted. And I went from, sort of knife hands to, hey, and I was an assistant coach on a lot of her teams, and she would come into the dugout, just sort of really crestfallen because whatever, she grounded out or something like that. Even though she had an RBI, she didn't care about the RBI. She cared about the ground out. And I went from like I said, knife hands and screaming at her to putting my arm around her and going, hey, let's take a walk, you know, and I'd lead her through breathing exercises. And then again, it was that off season where I said, hey, have you noticed a change in how I'm parenting and my attitude and how I deal with you kids, right? And that sounded probably negative. It was not, you know, how I deal with you kids. And she just kind of like, again, 8th grade sarcasm. She gets it from me. She goes, yeah, you don't go crazy anymore. And I'm like, okay, all right, that's good enough answer. And I said, do you know why? I mean, do you know why that is? And she it kind of rolls her eyes. She goes, it's all that mindfulness stuff you're doing. I was never, I mean, because part of the program is to sit there for 2 minutes tops at a time and just sort of be present, and they guide you through, you know, some verbal cues. Anyway, and it's all that mindfulness stuff you're doing. And I'm like, that's right. And I said, you know, if that's something you want to, you know, we can work on, I can sort of build that into your softball. And your softball, she didn't really think much of it. And then slowly but surely, without realizing it, I started to build it in. And then I started explaining to her what is happening inside of her brain. Cause she's a pretty, you know, all my kids are pretty smart, but she's always the one that needed to know exactly why things worked and how they worked. And so I started explaining to her, like, this is what's happening in your brain when this happens, that sort of thing. And that sort of built the trust over time. Those are really only the conversations I've had with them. I've also had, I mean, you know, when like this is their first semester of freshman year. And it was a big transition. Now, luckily my wife teaches at their high school. So, you know, mom's there, but the rigor the academic rigor, they just weren't used to. And so I have encouraged them, hey, look, like just have a more positive, think of it as a spectrum from negative, and they don't, one of them doesn't like math. So anyway, -10 to +10. +10 is like, you know, joy, and -10 is absolute misery. Okay. Where are you right now on that spectrum? Where are you before you walk into the class? Where are you on that spectrum? Before, you know, you start your test, right? Where are you on that spectrum, right? Because if you're -3, let's try to get you to a 0, right? And so those are some of the mental fitness exercises can help with that. But those are some of the conversations I have.
So they're not only seeing the positive change in dad, but they're seeing the positive change in themselves, which is a lot of fun, I'm sure, for you to kind of to work through that.
Yeah.
I love the -10 to +10 side of the house, because if you're already walking in with a -3, -5 before the test has even started, how are you so close to misery and the thing hasn't even happened? And it's one of those things that the angst building up to something is way worse than the actual thing 9 times out of 10, you know, but we can make the thing be way worse because of the angst that we had building it up. But the thing itself is really not a big deal.
And it's contagious, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, if one of you is at a -5 and the other one's at a +1, right? That +1 is probably going to be, you know, down to a negative anyway. So sorry, you get the idea.
Oh no, totally get the idea. And we saw it in the military all the time too. Like if the leader is fearful and negative, like, boy, that makes that mission way less comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Because you just don't know. And I had both I guess you would say the pleasure and the displeasure of not having any leadership there for me, because I was an attachment everywhere I went as an Air Force guy being attached. So like I would just get randomly thrown onto a team to go to a mission because they were suspecting to find bombs. So, and it was like, man, oh man, I got to see so many different things and go, oy vey, I am so glad I don't work for that guy. Or, oh man, I'd love to work for that person again. Realizing that that is contagious and everybody reacts differently on that team. And us as dads inside of our family, we're the leaders of this family, and how we're behaving is contagious. You talked about it without necessarily meaning it.
Yep.
When you talked about your kids at the dinner table, right? Like your behavior led to them going, ooh, I just dropped the fork.
Yep.
Is this going to be a whirlwind? Okay, like you're setting, everybody's getting to the temperature you're setting. You're the thermostat. Can we adjust ourselves so that everybody else can be comfortable in that room? You know, because they're going to move with the temperature that we set as the thermostat in that house. So, man, and boy, I'd love to be able to teach my kids to be that same thermostat, because they're going to be, you know, especially my boys. They're going to be. I'm not saying my daughter won't be. She will be too. She's going to be a hard charger like her mom. But man, oh man, like, can we teach our young men to lead like young men? Would be a phenomenal way to make this happen. So
when you hear your kids yelling at each other the same way that you yell at them, boy, that mirror is big and bright. And it's just like, wow, what is that? You know, because I've seen it over the last year and a half, sort of go from that, right, to more. And look, kids still fight, right? They still, but as long as you show up calm and present, they're going to eventually pick up on that, and they'll follow cue. But yeah, I remember one time my daughter's yelling at my son or whatever, and my wife just looks at me. She's like, "Does that sound familiar?" And I'm like, "That was a gut punch, right?" Because you're like, who taught her that? Oh wait, that was me. It wasn't like cussing or anything, but it was just like, why are you flipping out over such a small thing? Anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, it's easy for us to do. It's easy for anybody to do. So I love what you're doing. I love that you're trying to build other strong Christian men to become great leaders in their family, great leaders in their workplace. Well, before I ask this question, was there anything that we started talking about that you wanted to double back on? Is there anything that we haven't been able to touch on that you'd like to be able to jump into before we start to wrap this one up?
I don't think so. I could talk about the impact deployments had on my relationship with one of my kids. That was tough. I'll do it anyway. My third daughter, she was 4 months old when I deployed to Afghanistan for 10 months. And between 4 and 9 is when your kids' brains start developing that function, or that part of the brain that says, Mom and Dad are going to come back into this room when they leave this room, right? And so I left at 4 months. And so as far as her brain told her, I'm never coming back. And so I redeployed. It took years to rebuild that relationship for her to understand who I was in her life and that sort of thing. And the yelling didn't help either, right?
For sure.
I mean, the stress that I brought, that didn't help. And then, so we're great. And then I deployed in 2019, and, now she's 6, and I come home, and she didn't hug me, probably voluntarily didn't hug me for 2 years after that deployment. And that was tough, right? The first hug I remember getting from her was Christmas morning, and she came out, and she was super excited, and she just hugged the closest person she saw, and it was me. And I was like, I just lost it. I was like, she's hugging me, right? And I look over at my wife, and I'm like, can you see what's happening here? And my daughter looks up, realizes it's me, and ran away. And I'm like, oh, that was nice while it lasted, right? And then this is another softball story, but she always is shy and as timid and as withdrawn as she was. She insisted she wanted to play softball, so we signed her up for softball, and just rec league, And my wife goes, "Hey, they're looking for someone to help coaching. Do you want to do this?" And I'm like, "No, absolutely not. Like, I was terrible at baseball, right? I mean, I don't know what I'm doing." And she's like, "I think this might be a good way to sort of get your relationship going, with her." And she wasn't wrong. And now I'm way too deep into the local SoCal rec league softball scene. But now she hugs me. Now she's turning 13 in April, so maybe those hugs will start going away. But those deployments hit that pretty hard.
I try to explain to folks, especially in the business world, that, you don't have to go on a deployment for you to get that separation from your kids. No. Sometimes we get so drawn into our business, we get so focused on our business that we come home, tuck them into bed, and go to sleep. And it's like you're not actually, but effectually doing the same thing. Like they don't know who the heck you are. They're never around. They don't see who you actually are. They only see, okay, maybe I got tucked into bed. And it's like, man, oh man, like it's great to hear that's coming back, right? That you were able to take that back and say, hey, these are some things that I can actually do to make an impact in my kid's life, to help them get closer to me, to help me be closer to them, and be a good, strong leader in the child's relationship. So a very good, positive addition for folks to be able to hear that.
Yeah, that presence is so important. Like I said, my dad worked tons of hours. My mom worked 2 jobs. I don't know if they went to every single one of my events, but I'll tell you what, Adam, I remember them being at every single one of my events. And I was, as long as I'm not deployed, I'm going to be there. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and I'm glad that you're doing that. And a whole new life ahead of you now, being able to do this. As you started off by saying stay-at-home dad and coach, right? And like what a way to be able to impact your kids' lives. They're still young enough to be able to make a massive impact, to be able to be there and to be able to see all the things. That's one of the things that my wife was looking at. She was like, I've missed out on a lot with our oldest child, and I don't want to miss out on that much on purpose with the others, which is why she chose to retire instead of, go and make 06 and move on and keep doing the thing. And it was like, no, like there are more things in life than putting on that bird, and there are more things in life than this. Like, let's focus on where the impacts actually is made.
Yeah.
Because as I'm sure you saw a bajillion times, somebody separates, we fill their seat with another Joe.
Yeah.
and somebody else takes it and runs. Like when I leave, somebody else is going to take that. Nobody else is taking dad. Nobody else is taking that spot. Nobody can fill this role the way that you and I can, the way that the person listening to this podcast can. You are in that role for a reason, and nobody else can take that. So we might as well do the best with it and stay focused on how to improve the role that nobody else can substitute for.
Yeah, I love that. You're so spot on, Adam, because as a young lieutenant, I mean, I remember my first sergeant telling me, LT, the Army doesn't care about you. People in the Army care about you, but the Army doesn't care about you. You can get hit you can get run over by a car tomorrow, and trust me, that platoon will be just fine, and it'll have a PL, and the next day. But you're right, nobody can fill my shoes as a dad, and in retirement, our roles, the roles my wife and I play within the family completely flipped and almost overnight, right? And I love it. I don't love the laundry, okay?
Yes, I can concur with
that. But it took me 5 minutes into driving my kids to school to realize what an incredible gift this is. I get to walk my son to school. Do you have any idea how fun it is? Like just a 12-minute conversation with a 9-year-old boy, walking to school. I tell him Bill, this is the best 10 minutes of my day. And some of those conversations, look, sometimes he's grumpy and he doesn't want to talk to me because I just chewed him out because we're 5 minutes late. Those are much fewer and further between than they used to be. But yeah, anyway, it's awesome.
Yeah, my wife, after she retired, we kind of swapped again, right? Because I ended up doing the homeschooling and working business from home and doing all the stuff. And then now, like, we had just bought a new business at the same time that she is retiring. So I was like, all right, well, now I'm going to be at the business a lot, right? So then all of a sudden I'm gone and she's home and she's like, what's happening here, But it has been an absolute blessing to have her home with the kids. I just cannot say enough how much I love being able to sit here and listen to them out there. My mom just came by, so they're making cookies now because this is, as we're recording 10 days before Christmas. But obviously they're making a bunch of Christmas cookies and doing this. Like, man, oh man, do I love this, so much more than anything I've done, previously. So it is an absolute blessing to be able to listen to the family out there doing their thing, being able to go out, and I'm going to go steal some cookies from them, of course, because I've got to test it to make sure they're good.
And I always give my wife all the kudos and all the credits because she had it as a stay-at-home dad. I have it easy, right? I get the kids to school and I'm good. No, I mean, she had to, like, just think about COVID. I was in Afghanistan during COVID.
Yeah.
And we got orders to come here to California to do an RTC job. I mean, she had to get the house ready to sell during COVID. She had to take care of 4 kids during COVID. I mean, it was, 9 and under, like, no, her job as a stay-at-home mom was far more challenging, and boy, she made such a bigger impact than I could have if I were her at that time. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Really set the stage for you to make your life a little bit easier now. That's for sure. So that's why I tell people all the time, like, the 2 best decisions you can make in your life: follow Jesus and marry the right woman. If you do those 2 things, gracious, your life just got way better, and it's and it sounds like you're doing both of them. So, well, Dan, it was awesome getting to know you a little bit, chatting, trying to, kind of learn where you're at. I appreciate the passion and energy you're putting into helping men show up better for their family, show up better for their business. If folks are hearing this and they want to learn more about your coaching, they want to learn more about you, what is the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I've got a website. We can put it in the show notes, www.findyourazimuth.com. And again, as coming out of the Army, an azimuth is a direction. And it's spelled with a Z, and it's a weird word. I got a little too cute, but it's a good conversation starter. I mean, you know what I mean. findyourazimuthcoaching.com. I also have a podcast. It's a solo podcast. Drop 1 episode a week. It's quick, 10-minute listen. I'm called the Positive Legacy Podcast for Christian Fathers. Yeah, or my contacts will be in the show notes, email, Instagram, all that good stuff.
Fantastic. Well, Dan, I thank you so very much for helping a ton of people find their azimuth. I'm looking forward to hearing more stories about folks who are doing that and the growth that you're going to have with the coaching. I thank everybody for listening.
Thank you so much for listening to the BizDad Podcast. We hope you found some value in your time here with us, and we look forward to bringing you the next episode. If you've enjoyed today's show, please subscribe and share so you and your friends won't miss our upcoming episodes. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Rumble, where we continue these discussions and share more valuable content. Be the dad you know you need to be and run your business in a way you're proud to share with your kids. Keep crushing it.